Welcome to the Abe Legal Podcast. We are really grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. We come to you uh, as a service, really, of Abe Legal, which provides world class legal and now fitness professionals provided to you online. So you don't have to even leave your home in order to access these professionals. We have people who are standing by and ready to help address both your legal needs as well as your fitness needs. And we're really happy for the platform that we've launched with the support of both Silicon Valley uh, investors and supporters, as well as supporters like the people who are on our platform. And we look forward to making that available to you. We have a great guest who's on standby and ready to talk with you about his practice. We have one of our world class lawyers who is available to you by visiting www.abe.legal and going on and scheduling an appointment. If you have an issue, perhaps you may have a child in a school who's not performing because not of his own choosing, but because of things that are happening in that school, especially during COVID. Well, we have on our next guest, our upcoming guest, he has some advice for you. And the reason why he's special, well, I'll introduce him and you can probably figure it out. So, without any further ado, let me introduce Attorney Taalib Saber. Now, he's special for many reasons, but one of the reasons why I like to say he's special is because, as you can guess it, we have the same first name. Although he spells his name a little bit differently than I, we do nevertheless have the same first name. And assalamu alaikum and welcome, Attorney Taalib Saber. How are you?
Walaikum assalam. I'm well. How are you?
And where are you based these days, Attorney Saber?
These days, well, two places. Greenbelt is where my office is, and then I also operate out of Baltimore as well.
Okay, excellent. Well, it's great to have you here, and I think I want to go straight into some of the conversations that a lot of folks might want to actually engage with you. But before some of the people out there who would want to utilize your service, maybe before going ahead and visiting Abe.legal and signing up for a consultation with you, maybe they might want to know a little bit about you and how you became Attorney Taalib Saber. So if I was going to read a book called The Making of Taalib Saber, can you give me the chapters, an abbreviated version of the chapters from when you graduated from undergraduate school or what schools you went to and through the present day?
I would say self-discovery, self-discovery, knowledge of self, and really being able to crystallize what my purpose and goal is, and to be able to effectuate that through aspects of law, film, community activism, things of the kind.
And so, in that context of who made, why you decided to go from undergraduate and you, again, which undergraduate school did you attend?
Morgan State.
Morgan
Go
State. All right,
Bears.
the Bears, right?
Yes, sir.
So you decided to go from Morgan State to which law school again?
North Carolina Central.
North Carolina
Yes.
Central.
Mhm.
Now you were working, I understand, for the state legislature before going to law school. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Okay, a little homework.
Oh, of course, we have to do some homework. So tell me, I mean, what was it like as did you start at the state legislature while you were in school itself, or did you graduate and then go to work for the state legislature?
So I started even before then. So when I was in high school, what happened was my mom, she was um, in the civic association back home in Temple Hills. So she was able to introduce me to different politicians, local leaders, and things like that. And through that, I was able to build a connection with a couple of the state senators and the state delegates. And it was funny because Senator Muse at the time, C. Anthony Muse, he was the senator, and I was working with him prior to me going to college, undergrad. And I would joke with him when I was in undergrad because I told him, like, once I graduate, go to law school, and become a lawyer, I'm gonna come back and take his position. So we had a good laugh about that. But uh, when I excuse me, when I had my internship at the state legislature down in Annapolis, I was able to maneuver a little easier because I was familiar with the terrain and the territory. I worked at that time for Delegate Barbara A. Robinson, and she was a beautiful elder who helped me to cultivate, I would say, understanding the laws and how they work, but more so being able to hone in on other aspects of me, because I always I pride myself in being just a slightly different attorney in the sense that law isn't the only thing that I do, and because she was a delegate that not only was a legislator, but also she was in the arts. We had several instances where we talked about, collaborations, and she actually was one of my inspirations for my forthcoming book that I have, my poetry book. But that kind of got my feet wet, being able to be her intern, work with the senators and delegates that I already knew back home when I was in Annapolis. So literally, I was just walking the building and going into this office, going into that office, talking about laws and policies with these different politicians and leaders, and that helped to cultivate my mind to start thinking, okay, what is it like to be a lawyer? And I had no lawyers in my family, so it wasn't as though it was something familial that I could look up to. It was more so of, okay, this is my environment and this is who I'm around, so I can start to think about how am I going to make this work. And then we were always told growing up that if you go to college, in order for you to become a lawyer, you have to be a political science major. At least that's what I was told. So that's the reason why I went that route of being a political science major, having an internship at the Capitol, and the entire time I'm just thinking, become a lawyer, become a lawyer, become a lawyer. And then when I got into law school, that's when things were it became a bit real in the sense of knowing that there was a ceiling, or there's essentially like a ceiling when it comes to practicing law. And that changed my mentality a bit because I had a little slight crisis when I was in law school. And it was more so because of the trip that I took to South Africa in 2013. And while I was there, I was able to see a lot of the conditions that exist amongst African people in South Africa that were very similar to how we were living in the States. And I was able to take a camera and document, interview people on the ground, things like that. So I never forget coming back to law school, I was talking to my property professor, and I told her that, I felt like I was in a bit of a dilemma because I like the film work, but, I'm in law school and this is something that I want to pursue. So she used her resources to help me out and to introduce me to people in the art realm and things like that. But when I was speaking with my mentor and Professor Irvin Joyner down in North Carolina and at the school, we would have open and honest conversations just about the law, just about injustice, because that was always my passion. I went to law school initially to become an international human rights lawyer. And that's also the reason why, as we'll probably talk about, I got into education law too, because that's something that can be practiced on an international level, particularly when it comes to disabilities. But after speaking with him and having an open and honest conversation about how I felt about the law, how it impacts my people particularly, but oppressed people generally, he was able to make it very practical and tangible for me to still practice and have the fulfillment that I desire and advance the causes that I want without selling my soul.
Wow, that's a beautiful introduction to what motivated you to become a lawyer. And so perhaps you can fast forward and give me some idea about what then motivated you to go, from law school into education law, because this is something that not a lot of people even know exists. How did you do that? And give me a quick rundown of what is education law?
Sure. So I'll start with the last one first. Education law is an area of law that involves really anything dealing with the school. So it has a lot of overlap with some other stuff. So you may have an overlap with civil rights. You may have some overlap with family law. Excuse me, because all of that is essentially included in it. But it focuses on school policies, school laws, things that impact the child on a day to day. If a child has some type of disability, then that's rolled into education law as well. And just essentially how the school is governed and how your children are handled within the school system. How I initially got into education law was this probably was once I left law at my last year in law school, I already knew that I didn't want to work for a big firm again, because of my background and some of the things that I want to do. I felt as though at that time, a firm life would kind of tie me down too much. So my plan was to work with an attorney for a couple of years to be able to develop my craft and hone in on my skills, and then really truly branch out and stand out on my own. So fortunately, throughout this process, I've been able to have a lot of mentors that have assisted me, including Attorney Kareem, to assist me throughout this process. But specifically with education law, I I mentor, outside of law, and I was looking just at some of the young brothers who I work with, and I wanted to do something that or get involved in the area of law that would assist them. That wasn't criminal law. It wasn't family law. And also, like I said, because of my international roots, I wanted to do something that had an international impact. So, in the event that, which ironically enough, I'm working on now, in the event that I have a presentation before the United Nations on certain issues that impact Black folks in the United States in education and some other areas, then I would be well equipped and well versed in it. But education law, I wanted something that not too many people were in, and at the same that I can specialize, really hone in on and fine tune my skills. But at the same time, something that I was passionate about, something that gets overlooked, and definitely with a group of people who ordinarily would not get the representation that other people would. So that's the reason why I really wanted to dive into education law.
Now, when a person, be it a mother, father, a guardian, a parent, has an issue relating to their child's performance in school, maybe they might feel their child is being bullied. Maybe they might feel their child has a disability and is not being given the resources they need. What are some of the first kind of immediate steps that you might advise? And I know those are kind of two different types of issues, but perhaps there's some commonalities. What are some of the things that you first of all want to find out, and then what steps do you begin to give as advice to those particular parents?
Absolutely. One of the first things that I would ask a parent who either had a child that was subjected to bullying, or if it possibly is a disability, would be how long has this been going on? What have you reached out to the teachers regarding this situation? Have you reached out to the administration regarding this situation? Have you documented any of this? What specific behaviors are going on that's attributing to what you may suspect to be a disability or what you may believe to be bullying? And one of the things that I think parents would strongly benefit from is just documentation, like just starting out with documentation. Because if you can have a track record starting out to say, okay, let's take bullying, for instance. Okay, my child comes home and I'm noticing that his behavior is a little different. Maybe he's lashing out a little more, or perhaps she is more silent than what she normally is. She may be struggling in school with the grades. I would have the parent document that and just say, okay, on October 27th, 2021, my child has done this. This is a difference. And then as the parent is observing the child, start to talk to the school administrators and the teacher. First, start with the teacher and ask the teacher, okay, well, I've seen a difference in behavior when it comes to my child over the course of however many days or whatever the case may be. Have you noticed this pattern? And the teacher can either say yay or nay, but at least raising the issue with the teacher. So now they've been put on notice. And then thereafter, so let's hop to the Disabilities Act. So if you suspect your child may have a disability, then you can ask the teachers about it or bring it up to them. And then you will want to ask for an assessment and ask the teachers to start the assessment process because you believe that your child may have a disability. And that's a whole different set of rules when it comes to disability, because for the most part, states govern the school systems, whereas with special education, that's more of a federal type of thing. So there's different rules that apply. But in both situations, I would always tell the parent to document it and then reach out to and have a conversation with your child, but reach out to the staff and to the school just to put them on notice, because that's a big thing with notice, particularly if you're going to end up suing the school, whether it be or the school district, whether it be for the bullying or the disability. You want to always give notice in enough time in advance before you do anything legally.
Now, let me ask you, how long does it take once you have, again, gotten a consultation with you, for example, by going to Abe.legal, and you have given the parents what needs to be done and what steps that need to be taken. Once you all contact the school, how long does it generally take for the school to respond? And do you kind of set a deadline and say, okay, you have until X date to respond, after which you can expect legal action? Give me a little sense of what people can expect in terms of managing expectation.
Sure. So normally I would say about 45 days is kind of like the floor for the most part of any type of procedures that may happen. So once you reach out to, and this could be also, say if the parent wants to just retrieve their student's file, because that's another thing that parents don't realize, the rights that they do have to their files. But typically I would say around 45 days, because you want to give the school time to be able to respond to certain things and certain issues that occur. If the child, and it is facts and circumstances with it too, because if it has to do with, say, if we're removing a child who has a disability from the school or from class, or if the child has, if there's something that is diagnosable with the child and is attached to the child's behavior, then the child can't consecutively miss 10 days or more worth of classwork. So, and that's under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA. So you have that time frame as well. But with that, you have certain meetings that happen and occur. And the difference in education law, as opposed to maybe some of the others, is that a lot of stuff is administrative. So you have to exhaust a lot of administrative remedies first before you actually go to file a suit. So, as lawyers, we know that can take a little time to do. But for the school to respond to like a request that you may have, generally I would say about 45 days. you would allow the school to take to provide you with any records, anything that you may ask for.
Now, let me ask you about one of the things that is happening right now, because you mentioned the IEDA, and I want to get back to the IEP, and we're giving these acronyms, and so I want you to explain it. But before doing that, in fact, I'll tell you what, let's go into this issue, the IEP, and I will bring up the other issue that I think is something I'm sure you've been following in a minute. But tell me about this IEP. A lot of parents, when they get a notification, for example, that their child may have a disability, and so that child is going to be placed in a program to address his or her disability that might even involve the child being moved out of his class or her class to another classroom, or maybe even a whole nother school in itself. What are some of the conversations that you have with parents who are facing that, and what are the risks of an IEP going bad? What are some of the worst conditions, or some of the horror stories that you might know of from an IEP or a program for a student working actually against them as opposed to working for them?
Okay, so the IEP stands for the Individualized Education Program. So to break this down a bit, with special education or children who may have disabilities, students with disabilities, there's a separate type of doctrine that works with them for them to be afforded the same rights and privileges that students who do not have disabilities have. Because the whole point and purpose is to provide free and appropriate public education, or FAPE, in the least restrictive environment. So ideally, what you want to do in a utopian type of society, what would happen is a child who has disabilities would be placed in the same classroom as a child that does not have disabilities, because the belief is that when you're working together, then the child with disabilities understands exactly how to maneuver with someone who doesn't have disabilities, and they don't feel isolated. They don't feel like it's a taboo.
So
And
they would be placed in the same room, not isolated, right?
yes, yes, yes. So and vice versa with the child that does not have disabilities. Now, what the IEP is, it's a federal document that follows the child all the way out of school. So typically when they're 21 years old, for those that have disabilities, and it outlines exactly, like to the T, what the child is supposed to get. I have a book here, and I wanted to, because I don't have a sample IEP with me. In this book it does, but so basically in the IEP you can expect that it'll have the services that the child needs, the disability that the child is working with, any transitional services that they may have, if they need like assisted technology type of things. So things that may help with getting their access to education. If a child, say for instance, if a child has autism, perhaps they may need a certain amount of hours a week as it relates to occupational therapy or physical therapy, stuff like that. So the IEP is very detailed as it relates to what services are supposed to be provided to the child or the student, and exactly who is supposed to be providing these services. The interesting thing, as I am growing in the practice area of special education and education law, is that you find the IEP is an excellent template for education, period, not just children that have disabilities. It should be something that every student has, because it's so individualized to that particular student. And think about how we have these overcrowded classrooms now, where the students may not even be learning anything, or you have a child that learns based on audio, like they have to hear it, over and over again, whereas you may have a child that literally has to do it. And unfortunately, what happens is when you're placed in the schools, particularly in public schools, you're placed into the classroom, and the teachers, for the most part, you do have exceptions, but like for the most part, the teachers kind of teach a blanket type of style for the children. And whereas in the IEP, it's extremely individualized and specific, and it has to be, because, and to the point of something going awry, something going bad, if your child only is receiving, say, a half an hour a week of physical therapy or one-on-one time, say there needs to be an aide with the child to be able to assist them in a classroom with the general children who do not have disabilities. Say the child that's in that classroom needs an aid and they don't receive it, then you can be subjected to, like, if the child gets hurt or something like that, or even if the child is not learning. And there's a case called Andrew F. I don't want to get too technical because I want to make sure everybody understands this. But in this particular case, basically what happens is that you cannot lower the metric for children that have disabilities just because you believe they can't reach it. So it has to be challenging in a way to where it will make them progress. But at the same time, you can't essentially dumb it down because you believe that they're not going to understand it, or that you really just don't want to put the work in. And a lot of times that's what happens in IEPs is a lot of the stuff isn't adhered to. You have different jurisdictions altogether, not just Maryland, DC, but all over the country. A lot of teachers just are completely ignorant in the sense of lacking understanding and knowledge of how to handle a child with a disability, irrespective of the fact if they have an IEP. They literally just do not know how to do it. And because of that, there needs to be education around it. But oftentimes, some of the bad cases are you may have a child. I was assisting this one attorney with one case that there's a child that literally showed symptoms and signs of being having some type of disability, and the school never even questioned it. Like the parents would ask them, like, "Yeah, can we get our child is failing in this particular area," and he was continuing to be passed without any type of assessment, without any type of IEP, assigned to him, things like that. And even the teacher that he had, and I believe it was the first grade, he had again in the third grade, and she said that, oh, he's falling behind in these areas. We're just going to. They didn't refer him for an assessment or anything like that. They just referred him to. It was a area of professionals that would assist with children who were just generally not performing well.
Paraprofessionals.
Yes, as opposed to, like, again, more individualized and specialized that the IEP has. So the IEP, in a nutshell, is a document that breaks down line by line, word by word, everything that the child who has a disability is supposed to receive in services.
This is a very interesting area because, of course, some of the work that I do in the nonprofit space involves helping young people to get the training they need to enter into particularly cyber jobs. And also, one of the things that we work to do, and that is to, end this preschool to prison pipeline, right? And so the question that I really again I see is how, again, our children's lack of performance and the lack of resources given to our children in these early grades have an impact that lead to some of the unfortunate and really sad behaviors that are happening and playing themselves out on our streets on a daily basis. And this is something that I really think that we need to go into even more. And tonight's podcast won't provide that time. But I'd like to see if you could come back so we could do a part two of this conversation. But one issue before you leave that I'd like to have you go over is something that's happening that you might that you might be familiar with, and that is happening right now on the campus of Howard University. Our students there are protesting because of a lack of housing, one, and then the housing that some students have is not up to par. There's mold, there's also rodents and infestation happening, and this is at a time where Howard is getting all of the funding and all of the supposed they're getting promises of funding.
Right.
We'll see if they're actually getting the monies, but people are pledging monies to Howard, and the students are asking where are these monies going. And so from a basic, if a parent of a Howard student came to you and said, what can we do? Our students are out here protesting because they're not getting the types of services that they've been promised, and even maybe there might be faculty who are also willing to protest because they believe that they're not being respected. What can an education lawyer like you do to help people like that?
Absolutely. So this is a semi-cross that I was talking about between education law and some other areas, namely civil rights, because of course you have some of the titles, 7-9, things like that, that would also play a role in this. But specifically from an educational perspective, and actually Howard is a great example regarding public schools versus private schools too, on a secondary and primary school level, so elementary and middle school and high school. But basically, so in the outside of the undergrad context, when you have a public school versus a private schools don't necessarily have, they don't really have to adhere to the constitutional laws because they're not receiving federal fund. They're not governed by like the federal government in the sense that they're not receiving federal funds. It's a private institution. So they essentially can do, what it is that they want, so long as they're not overtly infringing on people's civil rights, but typically when you see lawsuits against schools, private schools, it's because of contracts. So breach of contracts. So something that you mentioned with regard to what's going on at Howard, of course receives federal funds. So they would be, there's an argument to be made that they can be swept under that. But I would advise the parents from the same way that I would advise with any of the other cases that I would have, document everything, but I would just go up the chain because like how I mentioned before about everything being seemingly administrative when it comes to educational issues, exhausting all of that. Because also when you go to court, it looks better too. Just to say, I talked to the provost, I talked to the president, I sent emails to these people and reached out.
And I was going to say that if I could interject,
Sure.
there are students who have been trying to actually get meetings with the president of Howard, and he refuses to meet with them. So let me ask, if you get to that point, you've exhausted your remedies, what are the specific allegations that you as a lawyer might make in a lawsuit against a Howard University?
Well, I would say definitely going to the point of the promises, because you can't. You don't have such a strong case as inferior education, but the strongest case would be that of just a breach of contract. If you're paying $50,000 a year or however much to attend a university, and you're being told within this exchange, this agreement, this contract, that I'm supposed to get housing that is uninhibited by rodents and different infestations and things like that, and is compromising my health, those type of things, I would sue them. I would file a lawsuit as it relates to breach of contract, because that's essentially what's going on here. If you can show discrimination amongst like whether it be race or gender or something like that, then that's when some of the other civil rights acts may come up. But specifically as it relates to what's going on here, my first inclination would be a breach of contract lawsuit. And because you've already talked, the president won't meet with you. So it's kind of like you have to be able to file the lawsuit or press them on the legal matter, and then still have your freedom of expression. And what I noticed that Howard is doing, what the president is doing, is because I had an opportunity to briefly look at their handbook, and there's a section in it that talks about allowing the students to be able to have freedom of speech and to organize and to join associations and things like that. But what the president is doing is he's saying that this is interfering on like the essential services, and it's creating a health and safety risk. So that's what he's falling back on, because it sounds like that now he's creating a defense to why they would try to expel these students, because that is in violation of the policy that Howard has. Is when you can protest, we can let you scream, we can let you march and do all these things, but if it starts to interfere with like health, safety type of risk and things like that, now you're in violation of the policy. So we can expel you. And then now you see, I don't know if it was the president, but I believe it was somebody else, I forget, who actually said that they were threatening to expel the students. So right now Howard is attempting to set their case or stack the deck to help them out. But as a parent, I would stand strong and just say, okay, I'm paying you this money. My child is going here and they're not receiving the services that you said that they would.
Well, in fact, I think that there are several areas that could provide evidence for investigation by federal and state authorities in the District of Columbia, state-like authorities, right? One, as you said, the issue of whether or not they are meeting their obligations under Title IX, for example, with respect to the accommodation for women. And there are a bunch of women who are leading the protests. And I'm sure that they could perhaps point out some things that are not being done. And I think that including in that is how the federal student aid funds are being spent, right? That is probably a very, very strong piece of evidence and a very strong authority that can trigger oversight by the federal authorities. In addition, are the possible DC housing code violations in some of the buildings that they are managing. And one last point that a real estate investment professional shared was the issue of whether or not they are actually using the assets, the properties of Howard University in the public interest. Meaning to say, if they are selling off these properties or transferring these properties to developers for 99-year leases, and then the students don't even have the opportunity to actually rent some of these properties because they're sky high. The question is whether or not they're using these properties in the public interest. And Howard University, as a federally chartered institution, has even a double requirement, again, even beyond the normal requirement of a tax-exempt organization. And so it seems to me that there are several grounds, not to mention, and from a faculty standpoint, they have argued that because of the actions of the president that resulted in the explosion of pipes a few years back, that they lost over $200 million in intellectual property. Wow. It just seems to me that there's several claims and causes of actions that could be included in a lawsuit. And I guess I'm just wondering who's going to be the first to file such a lawsuit, because it seems to me that there's a lot of liability there. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And as you just ran down, it's so many things that's going on with Howard, and they have been happening. This isn't the first time this has happened. And Howard, honestly, is not the only institution that's like that. You have a lot of schools that have housing violations and the different type of title, whether it be Title IXs and discriminatory practices that they do in relation to what's going on with housing for the students. So I believe that with the parents, that's why I'm a strong advocate for what the students are doing now in their protests and in their demonstrations, and keeping pressure on Howard, because not only are they embarrassing them publicly, but it's time for Howard to have some accountability because of the fact that we don't know how the funds are being used, and they're receiving so many funds and receiving so many pledges. There's no reason as to why these students should be sleeping in their cars, having to put hotels charges on their credit cards and things like that. There's no way that should happen. I remember my first year in Morgan State, they ran into an issue like that where they received so many students and they didn't have housing for the students. So this is something that happened 15 years ago. So like everything that's happening now is going to end up having a domino effect. And I do hope that, someone, possibly even me, if I get a case, file a lawsuit against Howard to let them know, like, look, this is not going to be tolerated. You cannot continue to treat your students this way. Even a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken, they had an issue with one of their students usurping funds or being in the financial aid office and receiving some funds when other students didn't even have money with regard to other activities that were associated or affiliated with Howard, including housing.
In fact, I understand that, in fact, it wasn't necessarily usurping funds, but those monies were gifts. And you can read between the lines.
Exactly. Gifts.
A male student receiving, $100,000 in gifts. Yeah. You can figure out what you think that might be about.
Exactly.
And again, but that's evidence. Absolutely. I would include that in my pleading if I was, Attorney Taalib Saber, which I'm not, but if I was an education law specialist and I got a case on behalf of the parents or students at Howard University, that definitely would be one of the exhibits amongst the many. But Attorney Saber, this has been a great conversation. We do need part two. We got to get part two because there's just too many educational policy and educational legal issues that need to be covered. And sadly, we don't have enough time to cover them all. But I do really want to say how grateful we are to have you as a member of our world-class team of lawyers and also yoga professionals. And we hope that you will begin also enjoying some of the great yoga classes that we have to offer on our new Abe for Yoga platform at abeyoga.com. But again, Attorney Saber, it's been great talking to you, and we look forward to having you back on the Abe Legal Podcast.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Attorney. I appreciate it.
Well, this has just been an incredible conversation. We definitely need more time with Attorney Taalib Saber, and we look forward to it. If you have a claim that you think needs to be heard by a lawyer, if you're a student, if you're a parent, if you are a staff member or a faculty member of Howard University or any other school that you believe is not treating you fairly within your rights, please contact Abe Legal at abe.legal and or www.abe.legal, and we can get you in contact with one of our world-class education lawyers, perhaps even Attorney Saber, and get that problem resolved. If you have any other legal matter, we can also work with you there. And if you are a school or a government that is looking at new ways to try to address some of the tension that your populations are experiencing, then look at the idea of using yoga as a cure. I really do believe that that's something else that we need to talk more about because the type of violence, the type of responses to some of the conditions of our society that are manifesting on our streets on a daily basis, it has to be stopped. And I do believe that one of the main issues is the issue of mental fitness as well as physical fitness. And we look forward to engaging with you in the future with some of our world-class professionals who are on the Abe platform. This has been Taalib Kareem, CEO with Abe Legal. We look forward to joining you again with more great information. Again, if you need to contact us, don't hesitate to reach out to me at Taalib, Taalib, at abe.legal, or go to www.abe.legal. We are here for you 24/7, helping those people with both their legal and also their health and wellness needs. With that, have a great evening and good night.